There comes a moment in life when you look at yourself and realize you're no longer who you were. Not because life gently guided you, but because it pushed, it burned, it broke. And somewhere in that breaking, you awakened a version of yourself that few people can recognize, let alone understand. This speech is for the quiet ones, the observers, the thinkers, the ones who had to carry storms in silence, the ones who rebuilt themselves when no one noticed. Because out of all the things suffering steals from you, it gives you one unexpected gift, a depth that ordinary people cannot fathom. When someone has endured deep suffering, they eventually reach a point where words stop carrying the weight they once did. Words once had the power to soothe, to persuade, to promise. But life teaches you, through disappointment, betrayal, and emotional abandonment, that words are the easiest thing in the world to give, and the easiest thing in the world to fake. After enough pain, you start noticing that talk is cheap, not because people are malicious, but because most people speak from impulse, not integrity. So you shift your focus. You stop listening to what people claim, and you start observing what they consistently do. This shift is not a choice. It's an instinct developed for survival. You didn't wake up one morning deciding to distrust words. You learned it the hard way, through promises that were never kept, apologies that were repeated too often, commitments that were made but never lived out. Eventually, the emotional cost becomes too high. You realize that trust cannot be built on what someone says, only on what someone chooses to live out. And so you evolve quietly, permanently. Patterns become your compass. You watch how someone treats you when you're no longer useful. You pay attention to how they behave when things don't go their way. You notice if they only show affection when they want something. You see if they respect your boundaries when it's inconvenient for them. The truth reveals itself not in their explanations, but in their repetition. Anyone can be kind once. Anyone can care when it's easy. But the person who shows up consistently through comfort and discomfort, through joy and frustration, is the one who tells the real story. People sometimes misunderstand this version of you. They think you're suspicious, guarded, or overly cautious. But they never saw the moments that shaped this instinct. They never felt the sting of trusting someone who used your vulnerability as an opportunity. They never sat in silence replaying a situation, realizing the signs were there all along, but disguised under pretty words. So while others rely on what they hear, you rely on what you've learned. You trust patterns because patterns speak truth, whether someone intends them to or not. This doesn't mean you became cynical. In fact, it often makes you more compassionate. Because once you see patterns, you also understand people's wounds, their insecurities, their unspoken fears. You read the emotional fingerprints behind their actions. You see what they can't explain. You understand what they don't know how to express. It gives you clarity, sometimes painful clarity, but clarity nonetheless. You begin to differentiate between someone who is emotionally inconsistent because they're careless and someone who is inconsistent because they're hurting. You see the story beneath the surface. Ultimately, trusting patterns protects your peace. It shields your heart from preventable pain and anchors you in reality rather than fantasy. It allows you to connect deeply without losing yourself and love compassionately without ignoring the truth right in front of you. And while this skill was born from suffering, it becomes one of your greatest sources of inner strength. There comes a point in life where solitude stops feeling like a punishment and starts becoming a form of liberation. For someone who has endured deep suffering, being alone is not a sign of isolation or emotional withdrawal. It is a sign of inner restructuring. You didn't choose solitude because you disliked connection. You chose it because it became the only environment where you could hear yourself think, breathe without pressure, and grow without interruption. There is a difference between being lonely and being alone. And your suffering taught you that distinction with absolute clarity. In the past, you may have surrounded yourself with people to avoid the discomfort of your own thoughts. You may have sought company to fill the spaces that felt too heavy or too silent. But pain forced you inward. It pushed you into internal territory that most people never explore, because they don't have to. You learn to sit with your emotions, even the difficult ones. The confusion, the disappointment, the grief. You learned to listen to the quietest parts of yourself, the ones that were ignored when life was loud. Slowly, the silence no longer scared you. It became healing. As you grew comfortable in your own presence, you discovered aspects of yourself that were previously overshadowed by the noise of external expectations. You realized how much energy you had spent trying to fit in, trying to be understood, trying to be enough for others. Solitude stripped all of that away. It gave you the freedom to exist without performing. It allowed you to reconnect with your deeper values, your natural pace, your unfiltered identity. You began to feel whole without validation, peaceful without company, and strong without applause. This is something very few people understand, because very few are forced to grow in this way. Your comfort with solitude also changed the way you relate to others. You no longer cling. You no longer chase. You no longer fear being left behind. Instead, you choose relationships that add to your life rather than fill a void. You set boundaries with ease because you no longer depend on anyone to escape yourself. People may misinterpret this as detachment, but it is actually emotional maturity, the understanding that connection is meaningful only when it's chosen, not needed. Your presence becomes intentional. Your energy becomes selective. You learn to appreciate people while never losing yourself in the process. Solitude also sharpened your intuition. When you spend time alone, you become more attuned to subtle shifts within yourself. You notice when your energy is off. You sense when someone's presence drains you. You recognize when a situation contradicts your values. You become self-aware in a way that makes you difficult to manipulate or mislead. What once felt like emptiness becomes a protective space, a place where you can return to recharge, reflect, and realign. Over time, being alone becomes something sacred, a form of emotional clarity that others may find intimidating. It doesn't mean you reject connection. It means you no longer seek it from a place of fear. Solitude taught you that your worth is not dependent on company, and your identity is not built on how many people surround you. When someone has walked through deep suffering, their empathy undergoes a transformation that most people cannot comprehend. It is not the gentle, comforting empathy that comes from theory, education, or good intentions. It is the kind of empathy forged in the fires of personal experience. You recognize pain because you've lived in it. You understand emotional complexity because you've had to navigate your own. This gives your empathy a sharpness, an accuracy, That can feel almost surgical. You don't just feel what others feel, you see into it with clarity that unsettles those who prefer their emotions hidden or unexplored. Your suffering turned your senses toward depth. While others listen to words, you listen to tone. While others observe expressions, you observe micro-expressions, the subtle winces, the avoided eye contact, the forced smiles. You notice tension in someone's voice even when they claim they're fine. You pick up on emotional inconsistencies faster than most people realize they're showing them. Your empathy isn't passive, it's perceptive. It's a form of emotional intelligence sharpened by necessity. You didn't choose to be this observant. Pain trained you to be. People often assume that empathy means softness, but yours doesn't flow from a naive wish to comfort everyone. It flows from knowing the weight of emotional wounds. You can sense when someone is hurting, but you can also sense when someone is manipulating, lying, or projecting. Deep suffering taught you the difference. As a result, your empathy contains both compassion and discernment. You can sit fully present with someone's pain, but you can also walk away when that pain turns into harm. You don't enable destructive behavior just because you understand where it comes from. Your empathy has edges, boundaries, and intelligence behind it. This sharpened empathy also gives people the impression that you know more about them than you should. And in truth, you often do, not because you're prying, but because human behavior is transparent to someone who has survived emotional storms. You recognize patterns instantly. You detect emotional intentions without explanation. You feel the truth underneath someone's rehearsed story. This can make others feel exposed, sometimes even threatened, not because you are judgmental, but because you see what they are trying to hide from themselves. Your insight can be a comfort to those who are genuine, but discomfort to those who are not. People who value honesty find your presence grounding. People who rely on illusions often find your presence unsettling. You don't have to speak much. Your silence is enough to make people question their own motives. This is not a power you ask for. It is a sensitivity you develop to survive environments where understanding the emotional atmosphere was essential for self-protection. Your empathy is sharp because it had to be. It helps you navigate relationships with precision. You can tell who needs compassion, who needs space, who needs accountability, and who needs distance. You're not easily deceived, pressured, or manipulated because your intuition is constantly reading the truth beneath the surface. This makes your connections more intentional, your boundaries more defined, and your emotional world far more aware than most people realize. You carry invisible scars that make you wise beyond your age. There are certain experiences in life that leave no visible mark on the skin, yet imprint themselves permanently on the soul. These invisible scars do not announce themselves to the world. They don't bleed, they don't bruise, and they don't demand sympathy. But they shape the way you think, react, perceive, and choose. They become the quiet architecture of your inner world. When you've endured suffering that forced you to confront realities most people avoid, you emerge with a depth of wisdom that looks unusual for your age. People notice it even if they can't explain it. They sense a gravity in you, a presence that feels older, steadier, and more grounded than your years should allow. These invisible scars came from moments that reshaped you, moments when you had to mature faster than you should have, times when you had no choice but to hold yourself together. Nights when you learned lessons that no one ever taught you. Pain became an uninvited mentor, forcing you to see life in dimensions that others your age have never considered. You learned the cost of trust too early. You understood emotional inconsistency too deeply. You saw the fragility of human promises too clearly. This kind of insight cannot be gained from books, advice, or observation. It comes only from lived experience, the kind that tests your spirit and stretches your understanding beyond its previous limits. Because of this, your wisdom does not feel like something you acquired. It feels like something that was carved into you. You don't just know things, you sense them. You can read situations faster than most people can process them. You anticipate consequences before they unfold. You recognize emotional patterns before others even realize they're repeating them. Your judgment carries a discernment that surprises people. You are rarely shocked, rarely naive, rarely unprepared, because life has already shown you the shadows behind the curtain. This inner knowing makes you seem calm when others panic, steady when others crumble, and reflective when others react impulsively. Your invisible scars also give you compassion, but not the soft, surface level kind. Your compassion is rooted in understanding how complex pain can be. You don't judge people for being wounded, afraid, guarded, or flawed. You see the reasons behind their behavior. You recognize the unresolved battles beneath their tone, the old hurts behind their defensiveness, the quiet fears behind their reactions. You understand that most people carry burdens they never talk about, because you learn to carry yours in silence too. This awareness deepens your empathy and softens your perception, even when you maintain boundaries. At the same time, your scars also make you less tolerant of superficiality. You value authenticity because you've had to be brutally honest with yourself. You value emotional maturity because you've lived through the consequences of immaturity. You value stability because you know what instability does to the mind. These preferences often make you seem selective or detached, when in truth you are simply protecting the parts of you that were once forced to survive without guidance. People may admire your wisdom, but they rarely understand what shaped it. They see the insight, but not the suffering behind it. They see the strength, but not the vulnerability that birthed it. They see the maturity, but not the moments that demanded it too soon. Your invisible scars are not signs of weakness. They are evidence of how deeply you have lived and how intensely you have grown. When someone endures deep suffering, their relationship with people, energy, and connection changes in a profound way. You stop letting everyone into your inner world, not because you think you're superior, but because you've learned what it costs to give the wrong people access to your heart. Pain becomes a quiet teacher, showing you that openness without discernment leads to wounds that take years to heal. So you begin to choose more carefully who you trust, who you listen to, who you allow close. This shift is often misunderstood. What looks like distance to others is actually protection. What looks like aloofness is actually wisdom. You didn't become arrogant, you became selective, and there is a significant difference. People who haven't experienced deep hurt often confuse boundaries with ego. They see your silence and think you're uninterested. They see your limited circle and assume you believe no one is worthy of your time. But they don't know the chapters of your story that taught you caution. They don't know about the betrayals that caught you off guard the friendship that drained your energy, the relationships where you gave everything and received very little. They don't understand that your selectiveness is the result of growth, not pride. Being selective means you value your peace more than temporary company. You've learned that your emotional world is not a public space. It's sacred. You no longer entertain people who leave you anxious, confused, or depleted. You don't tolerate inconsistency disguised as affection. You don't excuse patterns that hurt you just because someone offers occasional kindness. You don't sacrifice your intuition for the sake of fitting in or pleasing others. This form of selectiveness is not about closing yourself off. It's about opening yourself wisely. You also start recognizing qualities you once overlooked. You gravitate toward people who are emotionally responsible, not just emotionally expressive. People who respect boundaries rather than challenge them. People who show up consistently rather than dramatically. You choose presence over intensity, depth over charm, truth over entertainment. You're drawn to those who communicate honestly, who don't weaponize vulnerability, who don't use your empathy as an emotional shortcut. Pain refined your standards, and now you honor them. This selectiveness extends beyond relationships. You become mindful about where you invest your time, your attention, and your energy. You stop engaging in conversations that lead nowhere. You stop involving yourself in chaos that isn't yours. You let go of environments that feel heavy or disingenuous. You prefer genuine silence over forced socializing. You choose quality over quantity in every aspect of your life. People may misinterpret this as a personality change, but it is actually a survival skill turned into a lifestyle. With this shift, your life becomes clearer. You start feeling the difference between what nourishes you and what drains you. You notice how your body reacts around certain people. You respect your own emotional thresholds. You no longer apologize for distancing yourself from negativity or for prioritizing your well-being. You've learned that not everyone deserves a seat at your table, not because you think they're unworthy, but because you finally realized the worth of the peace you worked so hard to rebuild. When someone has endured deep suffering, their perception sharpens in ways that feel almost uncanny to others. You develop an ability to detect what is real and what is merely performed. Pretending becomes transparent to you, not because you're suspicious or judgmental, but because you've seen both genuine emotion and carefully constructed illusions up close. You know what authenticity feels like because you had to fight for your own. And you know what pretense looks like because you've been on the receiving end of it too many times. People may think they're hiding their true intentions behind charm, politeness, or confidence, but you can read the cracks in their performance long before they realize they're showing them. Suffering sensitizes you to emotional subtleties. You pick up on hesitation, inconsistencies, nervous energy, and forced enthusiasm. A slight shift in tone, a quick glance away, a smile that doesn't reach the eyes. You notice all of it, not because you're trying to analyze people, but because your mind automatically searches for the truth behind their behavior. When you've lived through emotional uncertainty or betrayal, you learn to observe closely. You learn to listen, not just to what is said, but to what is avoided. You learn to watch how someone acts when no one is watching. This intuitive clarity becomes a natural part of who you are. You see through pretending because you recognize the emotional signatures behind it. You know the difference between someone who acts confident and someone who is truly grounded. You sense when a person is being kind out of obligation rather than sincerity. You can tell when someone is pretending to care, pretending to be strong, pretending to be honest, or pretending to be someone they think you want them to be. You have lived through situations where pretending harmed you, so now you notice it instantly. This awareness protects you and simplifies your life. It keeps you from investing in relationships built on illusion. People often assume they can impress you with their stories, their persona, or their image. What they don't realize is that you are not drawn to presentation. You are drawn to truth. And truth can't be performed. You feel when someone is genuine because their energy aligns with their actions, their words match their intentions, and their presence feels steady rather than manufactured. Conversely, when someone is pretending, there is a disconnection in their behavior that you sense immediately. They may say the right words, but their tone betrays them. They may smile, but there's tension beneath it. They may act confident, but their eyes reveal uncertainty. This ability to see through pretending can make others uncomfortable. Some people feel exposed around you, not because you judge them, but because they know they cannot hide behind filters or facades. They sense that you observe more than they speak, that you pick up more than they reveal. But this clarity is not a weapon. It is a shield. It allows you to create relationships based on honesty rather than performance, depth rather than appearance. It helps you navigate the world with a sense of emotional precision that prevents you from falling into the traps that once hurt you. There is a kind of peace that doesn't come from comfort, privilege, or ease. It comes from surviving emotional storms, from walking through chaos that could have consumed you, from learning how to calm your mind when no one else knew you were drowning. This peace is not loud or dramatic. It does not need attention or validation. It simply exists within you, steady and unwavering. But because it is so unfamiliar to people who rely on noise, distraction, and constant stimulation, your peace is often mistaken for distance. Others assume you're detached, uninterested, or reserved, when in reality, you've simply learned the value of inner quiet. Deep suffering teaches you the cost of chaos. You remember what it felt like when your mind was restless, when your emotions were unpredictable, when every interaction carried the risk of conflict or hurt. You spent years navigating instability, both within yourself and around you. When you finally built peace inside you, it became something you refused to sacrifice again. This is why you protect it so fiercely. You no longer engage in unnecessary drama. You no longer react to every provocation. You no longer chase after situations that disturb your equilibrium. Your peace becomes sacred, and anything that threatens it feels like a threat to your well-being. People who are used to emotional intensity may misinterpret your calmness. They expect immediate responses, constant engagement, and constant emotional availability. But you aren't wired that way anymore. You respond when you're ready, not when pressured. You speak when there is meaning, not when silence is more truthful. You walk away from conversations that spiral into negativity. Your energy becomes intentional, not scattered. To someone who thrives on emotional turbulence, this can feel like distance. But it is simply clarity, knowing what deserves your attention and what drains your spirit. Your peace also comes from knowing yourself. Pain forced you to examine your patterns, your triggers, your wounds, and your needs. You understand your emotional landscape better than anyone else. So when you sense tension, manipulation, or dishonesty, you step back, not out of fear, but out of wisdom. You choose silence over arguing, space over confrontation, and patience over impulsivity. This composure can confuse people who expect you to react the way you once did, but you have nothing to prove. You have outgrown the version of yourself that needed to defend everything. This kind of peace also creates a natural boundary without you having to say anything. People feel it when they're around you. They notice that you don't rush, you don't cling, and you don't try to control anything or anyone. Your presence feels grounded, stable, and self-contained. Some admire it, others misunderstand it. But this peace is not for them. It is for you. The version of you who once lived in internal chaos, who prayed for stillness, who longed for emotional safety. Now that you finally have it, you hold it close and you move through the world with a quiet strength that looks like distance to those who have never known such calm within themselves. There is something remarkable that happens when someone walks through deep suffering and refuses to let that suffering harden them. Instead of becoming bitter, cold, or detached, you become the very figure you once needed. The voice you wished someone had spoken with, the warmth you longed for, the strength you desperately searched for. You didn't have a guide when you were hurting. You didn't have someone who understood the depth of your pain or the confusion that came with it. You had to navigate the darkness alone, learning how to hold yourself together in moments where you felt like falling apart. And because of that, you developed qualities in yourself that now make you a safe place for others. You learned patience because no one was patient with your struggles. You learned empathy because your own pain taught you how deeply unspoken emotions can cut. You learned to listen without interrupting because you knew what it felt like when your own feelings were dismissed. You learned to comfort others in ways you were never comforted. This transformation didn't happen overnight. It was carved through experience, reflection, and a kind of self-awareness that only develops when life has pushed you into corners you never wanted to stand in. When you were hurting, you didn't need someone to fix everything for you. You needed someone to sit with you in the heavy silence, someone who wouldn't rush your healing or minimize your emotions. Now, you naturally offer that presence to others. You know how to hold space for someone without judgment, without pressure, without needing them to be anything other than human. This is what makes you rare. The compassion you give isn't performative. It comes from memory, from understanding what it means to suffer quietly and survive quietly. Your strength also emerged from what you lacked. When no one supported you, you learned to become your own support system. When no one defended you, you learned to stand up for yourself. When no one validated your pain, you learned to trust your own emotional truth. These qualities became woven into your identity. Now, you show up for yourself in ways you once wished someone else would. You have standards. You have boundaries. You no longer beg to be understood because you understand yourself. You no longer chase people because you finally became someone worth staying for. This evolution often surprises the people around you. They may see your calmness, your wisdom, your resilience, but they don't see the nights that shaped them. They don't see the inner battles that forced you to mature faster than you wanted. They don't see the versions of yourself you had to outgrow. What they see today is the result of healing that was done in silence, through introspection, courage, and an unwillingness to let your suffering define your character. Becoming the person you needed doesn't mean you forget what hurt you. It means you transformed it. You used your pain as material for growth. Used your loneliness to build emotional independence. You used your heartbreak to develop depth. And now you embody the compassion, strength, and clarity that your younger self desperately needed to feel safe, understood, and believed.